And our last speaker for today is Jose Sequeros-Valle, and his talk is about a typology of discourse in Spanish.
Hello, everyone. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen with you guys. What do you guys see now? Do you guys see my slides or my comments?
Your slide.
No
My
slides.
slides. Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you very much. Especially most of you who are in Europe. I know it's pretty late for you guys, so thank you very much. So yes, as you can see in the title of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about discourse and the interaction between discourse and grammar in general. So in very general terms, what I'm asking is, or what I'm exploring is what is the process that allows speakers to adapt sentences to its discourse context. So in more concrete terms, I ask these questions that you can see here. So is one sentence type allowed in multiple discourse contexts? And is one context being fulfilled or by multiple sentence types? And also I'm asking whether intonation correlates to context. And the reason why I ask these questions is because of the very different approaches that has been proposed before. And all of them predict a very heterogeneous, very different answers to these questions. So just to give you a brief summary, what I'm calling a cartographic approach, it comes mainly from Bianchi and Frascarelli, or Frascarelli and colleagues. So they propose a cartographic syntax with a lot of different levels, and each syntactic position relates to a one sort of information structure notion. Then in the derivational approach, this comes from Lopez 2009, and in sum, it's syntactic process that gives, as a result, it gives you something like some of the non-canonical constructions that we're going to see in the next slide. Each derivational process receives an interpretation. And then what I am calling the discourse-free approach that comes from Rubio Alcalá 2014. And basically, he's leaving out any notion to discourse, to pragmatics, to information structure. He's leaving everything out of syntax. But again, we have very different predictions. So based on this, I have two goals, okay? So the first one is to provide experimental evidence to test those questions to see who is on the right track, and also discuss the theoretical implications of those findings. So this is the test case that I am using. So starting from the canonical sentence in one, then in number two, cleric double left dislocation, or CLLD, involves fronting of a constituent, which is a Pedro in this case, and it's cleric doubling law in this case. Further, focus fronting involves a similar movement to the left of the constituent, but without cleric doubling. So as we will see, the results will show that CLLD is acceptable in multiple discourse contexts, and CLLD and its canonical counterparts seem to be interchangeable. Further, intonation does correlate to discourse context. In general, we will see that these results do not follow from many of the previous models, and therefore, as an alternative, I argue for a morphological approach to discourse. So this project includes three sources of evidence, which are a corpus analysis, an acceptability judgment task, and a scripted production task. And the second and third studies were designed due to a number of limitations on the first one, on the corpus analysis. And therefore, for this presentation, I will leave out the corpus analysis and I will focus on the second and third experimental studies. Okay, so for the acceptability judgment task, 25 speakers of Spanish rated the acceptability of sentences in their discourse context. Namely, they were presented with sentences included, both fronted and non-fronted constituents. So basically focus fronting and CLLD versus canonical sentences. And they received, or they saw these sentences in 3 different discourse contexts. So let's see some examples. In the local condition, a target constituent such as a un chico is linked to a given reference such as those guys. So for example, here we have what happened with those guys. They saw one of those guys and I don't know about the other ones. Now in the new condition, the target constituent, which in the example is again un chico, is presented in a context with no antecedent. So for a question, what happened, an open question, what happened, you can get the answer, they saw a guy downtown. Finally, in the WH condition, the target constituent, which again is un chico, answers a WH question. So who did they see in the park? They saw a guy in the park, or they saw a guy around there. So these are the results. So you can see the judgment results in the vertical axis and the 3 conditions in the horizontal axis. Within each condition, you can also see the canonical sentences or the judgment for canonical sentences in dark blue and those for CLLD in light blue. And I'm going to be oversimplifying the results, okay? But if you draw a line through the midpoint in the scale, we see that canonicals and CLLDs are accepted or are over that line in the local and new conditions. But in the WH condition, the canonicals are accepted, but the CLLD is rejected. So yes, if you guys want more details, I can talk about that in the Q&A, or if you want to hear about the statistics. So in sum, both CLLD and the canonical sentences seem to be able to fulfill multiple discourse contexts, and the local and new contexts are fulfilled by multiple sentence types. So in principle, these findings seem to align with the discourse-free hypothesis. However, note that CLLD was not accepted in the WH condition, which indicates that this construction is not completely free from discourse restrictions. So there are some limitations to the construction. Therefore, none of the models fully predict our findings here, and I will come back for this later. So let's move on to the scripted production task. And in this case, 22 speakers of Spanish read sentences out loud. 12 speakers were presented with sentences with a fronted constituent, and 10 of them were presented with sentences that didn't include a fronted constituent. So it was canonical sentences. And in each case, or in each session, there were 3 discourse contexts, which are contrastive focus, contrastive topic, and given topic. So as in the previous study, I'm going to give you some examples. For contrastive focus, the target constituent Águeda contradicts a given antecedent a Jose. So if you are looking for Jose, he's not here today. I'm looking for Águeda, not for Jose. Then in the contrastive topic condition, the target constituent a Bárbara is linked to an antecedent, those 2, but only as part of as one of the members of a larger category. So for example, we see that Antonio is another member of the same group, right? So why are you looking at those 2? I'm looking at Barbara's eyes and Antonio's ears. And in the given topic condition, the target constituent, which is Águeda, is linked to an antecedent on a one-to-one relationship. So when do you see Águeda? I see Agda on the weekends. So once the participants were recorded, I analyzed 3 aspects for each of the target constituents. First, I look at the pitch accent, which refers to the outline of the string of the tonic syllable. Second, I look at pitch range, or the distance between the lowest and the highest point in the intonational string. And lastly, I look at the right boundary tone of the constituent to see whether the end of the intonational string end or had a high tone or a low tone. So again, oversimplifying the results, there were no significant differences for pitch accent. And then contrastive focus showed low boundary tones, while both topic types showed high tones. Lastly, contrastive focus showed a significant larger range than those of both topic types. But this was only limited to session 1, to the fronted constituents. So going back to the literature, we see that the prediction that pitch accent marks different discourse conditions was not confirmed. And this actually aligns with previous studies that has tested the same idea on a series of different languages. However, the significant result for the boundary tone and for range, with contrastive focus being different from topics, also align with previous studies. So going back to the research questions, we see partial positive answers to our 3 research questions. So the acceptability study shows that one sentence type may fulfill multiple discourse contexts, and one discourse context may be fulfilled by multiple sentence types. But as we saw before, CLLD is rejected in the WH condition, showing that the construction still presents some restrictions due to discourse or to information structure. And then for our 3rd research question, we see that intonation is in fact correlated to context, but not the way it was predicted by the cartographic approaches, meaning or emphasizing the role of pitch accents. Instead, it has something to do with the ups and downs on the intonational strings. So this is going to lead us to the second goal, which is to discuss the theoretical implications. So as I mentioned, none of the previous models fully predict what is happening at least for Spanish. And therefore, we go with the second goal, which is to discuss these theoretical implications, or an alternative that can be presented that is able to explain all the data. So what I am proposing is that sentence adaptation to context can be explained with the addition of only 3 morphemes to linguistic theory, which are plus anaphora, plus promotion, and plus contrast. And also they are inserted in syntax or in the morphosyntactic system as functional heads. So what this means is that these 3 morphemes come from the lexicon like any other morpheme. They are computed in syntax. I would say this can be discussed later, like any prepositional phrase or determiner phrase. And then they are externalized both for their phonology and for their meaning. So let me give you some of the concrete examples. So if we have, for example, the plus anaphora feature, this will be externalized as a link to a local antecedent, and phonology, and in terms of phonology, will be externalized as cleric doubling. We're going to talk about the details of that in a minute. For the plus promotion feature, or plus promotion morpheme, it will also be externalized as the introduction of a new referent, and also optionally externalized as phonologically externalized as cleric doubling. And for plus contrast, I'm sorry, this is externalized with the meaning of evocation of alternatives, and also in terms of phonology, it presents an emphasis on an emphatic phonology. Also, these three features can explain all the discourse contexts that have been proposed for at least for Romance languages. So the anaphora feature would explain given topics, plus contrast would explain contrastive focus, plus promotion would explain new topics or aboutness topics. Then we have the combination of anaphora and contrast that would explain contrastive topics, and the combination of promotion and contrast would explain shift topics. So let's see some examples. So here we have a canonical sentence that includes an anaphora feature. So what I am suggesting here is that so the feature anaphora or the morpheme anaphora takes the target constituent and their sisterhood and becomes the head of its own functional phrase. And then this phrase is inserted in its canonical position. And if there is no movement to the left, there is nothing else to, there are no more complicated assumptions to make. Now, if we have an instance where the constituent appears in the left, what I am proposing is that these initial steps would be the same. The constituent would appear in the same way as before in the canonical position. Yes, so it will be inserted in the canonical position, but then the movement to the left has to be explained. And what I'm proposing here is the following. So in this case, the movement to the left would take place due to the presence of an unvalued feature in C head. And that would trigger movement. And this trace left behind, that is what would externalize as cleric doubling. And also note that this mechanism is not new, as it has been, for example, proposed by Bošković in 1997 for WH movement. So I'm proposing kind of a parallel to that analysis. So in conclusion, this study explored the process that allowed speakers to adapt sentences to its discourse context using the Spanish left periphery as a test case. And based on corpus, acceptability, and production evidence, I argue that left peripheral and canonical sentences are interchangeable in various discourse contexts, and the phonology of contrastive foci is different than that of topics in general. So these results do not follow from none of the previous models that has been proposed in the past, and therefore I propose that I argue in favor of this morphological approach to discourse. Finally, here you have my citations for your reference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Muchísimas gracias.
De nada.
So we have some 12 minutes for discussion. Any questions or comments, please? Mark, please.
Yeah, thanks. I was interested in that. Learned Spanish for 5 years in high school and still don't know when to click double. So there you go. But I feel better about it now. So it's got all these factors. I have a question about the detail of the theory that you put there at the end, and then maybe a follow-up. So one thing you said was when you had the clitic doubling, the plus A feature triggered it moving to the periphery, and then the trace got spelled out.
Yes.
I was wondering if you had a view. I suppose traces don't always get spelled out in Spanish. Like if you have a non-delinked WH phrase or something, that one probably doesn't get spelled out. Do you have rule or generalization about when the trace gets spelled out and when it does not?
So what I'm arguing at this point, so I'm going to try to tell you what I am arguing at this point and the problems I have with that. that I still have with that. So what I am suggesting right now is that if when you have with something moves that includes an anaphoric or promotion feature, that the feature, not the feature, the trace that is left behind, that is what is externalized. And I'm arguing it as something specific for those two features. Okay. Then, for example, for contrast, for what I'm calling plus contrast, that wouldn't externalize. That would trigger the emphatic phonology of contrastive focus in the constituent, but the trace that is left behind when there is movement, there would not be any externalization of that trace. Now, I know, for example, that in the Spanish spoken in the Basque Country, even when there is movement in topics, they do not externalize clearly doubling most of the time. So I would argue that it is probably the same underlying structure, just without externalizing that trace. Or for example, in Porteño Spanish, like from Argentina, they do the opposite. Sometimes they don't, without movement, they are also doubling. Yep. But I guess I still don't have an answer to those questions. I'm aware of the problems, but I don't have the answers yet, I don't think.
Yeah, just to follow up a little, I was going to ask also whether the varieties you were studying did have the clitic doubling even when you did not dislocate the noun phrase. But the thing that where it would be interesting for me to see the proposal fleshed out a little more is you say like maybe the plus A feature gets optionally spelled out as clitic left dislocation. And I see what you mean at an intuitive level, but that's very different from how we normally realize a functional head at PF probably. And it seems like there's several ingredients that go into it. There's the dislocation, there's the feature on the C, there's the head there, and there is this matter of the spell out. So it seems like you have one feature that you want to be spelled out, but it's kind of spelled out in like a combination of three different ways that each has their own life. So that's different from saying, like in English, the plural feature gets spelled out as S at PF. Mm-hmm. There's sort of a one-to-one correspondence, and I think it's a kind of an interesting thing how to kind of figure out how to get that intuition, but still get it spelled out in, you know, this sort of composite of ways.
Yes, I think the way I expressed that externalization as optional, I guess it was not the right way to do it, because what I meant is that if there is movement, like, okay, just to clarify, this is based on Madrid Spanish. Okay, so in Madrid Spanish, when there is movement in topics, when there is movement, there is doubling. When there is no movement, there is no doubling. That's what I meant by optional. But instead of expressing it like that, I guess the way to express it is that when there is a trace, there is clearly doubling. When there is not a trace, therefore, or the other way around, when there is no movement and therefore there is not a trace, there is no doubling. Does it make more sense?
I see what you mean now and how you're dealing with the different kind of dialects. I think the general question is still there to be investigated.
No, for sure. This is more work. I need to work more on this for sure. Thank you very much.
Okay. The next question goes to Pavel Rudnev, please.
Very interesting. So I have a clarification question. I was wondering to what extent the analysis in terms of features really is dependent on these features also projecting a phrase of their own, because you made this parallel with PPs and DPs, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, DPs are complicated because of what I'm about to say. So we know what we know about PPs is that PPs can be selected by other heads, right? DPs are complicated because DPs somehow never get selected. MPs get selected, and DPs don't get selected. but so none of the information structural categories ever get selected. There is not a single functional head in any single language that would only subcategorize for a topic projection. At the same time being incompatible with the focus projection, right? See what I mean?
I'm not sure if I am following you.
So you have, for instance, verbs that subcategorize for a declarative clause, right? And which are at the same time incompatible with an embedded question. You also have verbs that subcategorize for a question and are incompatible with the declarative embedded clause, right? But you never have a verb or another head that would require that its complement should be headed by a topic head, and that would, right? See what I mean?
So let me just double check if I'm understanding. There is nothing in the grammar that is going to need a topic phrase as its complement. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay.
At least that seems to be an observation holding across, let's say, most languages we know of, maybe all, I don't know.
Yes, I guess this is me just thinking out loud right now, so I don't know how that could be formalized, but I guess the way I'm thinking about it is in terms of some sort of transparency of the phrase. What I mean by that is that if for example, the topic phrase, let's call it topic phrase. So if the topic phrase is in a direct object position, then it will be selected as a noun phrase or as a DP, and this topical feature that will be there just transparent without being affected or like without being relevant in that relationship between for example the verb and the determiner. Again, I don't know what the formal terms would be for that, but that would be kind of the intuition or the idea. That doesn't make sense?
Yeah, well, so I suppose the real question is to what extent you really need a head, I suppose, to attract something to its specifier or something. But
so what would you suggest?
Well, so you can sort of imagine. So there are these different formalizations of the left periphery, right? So on the one hand, you have let's say the traditional, let's say, complementizer phrase with maybe a top feature or a FOC feature, right? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you have a Ritzian kind of split left periphery, right? With distinct heads for topic focus, finiteness, force, etc., whatever those things are. And can you, for instance, have, I mean, I like the formalization in terms of features that you postulate. And I was wondering whether you can sort of have them not project a phrase and still keep all the other nice things going.
Yes, I mean, to be honest, the reason why I'm presenting this or I'm proposing this as heads is because, you know, it comes from all this cartographic tradition, right? Where you have the head selecting. So that's the reason why I'm doing it like that. One option that I have also considered is maybe thinking of it in terms of distributed morphology, something like that, where by the time the constituent appears in syntax, it already has the feature inside of it, right? So this is something that I have been told before. I have been suggested that before, but I guess I need to work on the formalization. So what do you think? What difference do you think that makes proposing it as a head or as a non-head?
Yeah, well, what I said. So, right, heads are selected. Features are sometimes selected, sometimes they're not selected. They can just be adjoined to something, and either as a and here there's lots of options, either in the syntax, you have an NP being adjoined to, or let's say a topical feature being adjoined to something, or this happening in the morphology. I mean, lots of options, but
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. No, this is great. I don't have the solution for the problem, but it's a great. You're giving me a great direction to keep
Thanks.
working. Thank you very much.
Okay, there is still time for one short question.
Thank you guys for staying around this late. I really appreciate it. I know it's late over there.
Mhm. Okay. Well, then probably we have to thank our speaker and our speakers and everybody and close this very long session. Thank you very much, everyone.